So everyone, welcome. All right, so my name is Annabelle Munson. I'm your host and moderator for today's session. I want to welcome our new guests and welcome back all of our internal audience members, or excuse me, our returning audience members and the internal ones as well. I love it when our universal team joins in. I'm going to introduce our agenda and our experts for today. First, as always, Christine Van Bacchus, our Senior Account Manager and Ops Experts, sharing her global regional review, including the latest on restrictions, openings, access, high traffic events, top tips for pre-planning, and especially anything trip feasibility related, plus avoiding challenges while in active trip mode. Juan Muniz, our Senior Lead Specialist on Universal Global Regulatory Services team, with a breakdown on the breaking news out of Canada, plus US and Mexico ops updates. Next, an additional update on two hotspots, both Italy and the UK. Our special guest, Andrea with operations in Universal Aviation Italy. He's got a timely update on the situation in country for Italy, where demand has been skyrocketing. And then Jason Hayward, our general manager with Universal Aviation UK Stansted London, for a reality check on UK's gradual reopening process in the midst of very heightened interest for this key location. And we'll close out the day with your questions as usual. I do have two quick things on my agenda, in fact, though, before we get to our experts. This first item stems from recent news internally, in fact, that came my way regarding continuing education and training. So I have a special guest that I want to introduce. You may recognize him, especially from Schedulers and Dispatchers and other NBAA events. Gary Martin, so everyone's favorite training guru. Welcome, Gary.
Hi, everybody.
He's going to be hosting another continuing education online course soon. The buzz we hear from clients is that training is still very much on the agenda for many of you, since the ramp up to meet more travel demand continues, and everyone is still refreshing skills to meet the demand. So, Gary, can you just give us a very quick update on what class you have coming up next, and who is this session geared towards this time?
Hi, we're going to be doing a virtual session of our 2-day recurrent course, which is uh, our business aviation for schedulers and dispatchers. It's a 2-day course we're doing. We'll do it virtually. It's the same one we do at schedulers and dispatchers. So we talk about a lot of the best practices for regulatory services and regs around the world. We talk a lot about the facets that go into a business aviation trip, both US and international. So there's a lot of topics that we cover. The great thing about the course is it's being held virtual. It's over 2 days, but we shortened it a little bit from what it's done at the conference, just so we don't have everyone stuck to a virtual screen an entire day, right? We want to but we do keep it very interactive. We keep all the same information. MBAA has approved our virtual version. It's eligible for CAM credits. If you're applying for an initial CAM certification, you get 3 credits. If you're doing recurrent training, you get 2. But it's a very informative course that is very popular, went very well when we ran it in the spring of this year. It's geared specifically for business aviation professionals. Annabelle, any other questions?
No, you hit the high points, and thank you for including that CAM credit note, because that is one of the biggest questions that we get. So thank you for that. And hopefully, Gary, you're able to stay with us for the rest of the webinar. So Gary will be on in case you have any questions. I know training is still a very popular
I
question.
will point out one other thing,
Yeah,
Annabelle.
go
Our,
ahead.
our set date for the next course will be August 17th and August 18th.
Oh, good. So it's coming up soon. All right. Thank you, Gary. And I think Laura has dropped in. By the way, Laura's going to be doing this throughout the session, back to the usefulness of the chat area. She's going to drop in links that are useful both for contact and for resources. So please take a look there if you need more info. And thank you, Gary, for joining in. All right. And then my second item on my agenda is a poll question, also drawn from some of our internal resources, this case from our trip support services teams, as they work on vetting trip feasibility for all of you and the gear up for a lot of these newer international destinations that are on the roster, especially multiple leg trips. And now that we're venturing outside of the Mexico, Central America, and Caribbean and into new arenas. So we're actually hearing reports that getting COVID testing abroad to facilitate entry into countries continues to create challenges for some operators, especially on those multi-leg trips and trips where passengers have very tight schedules, because obviously testing takes time and is one more thing to add to the logistics. So I wanted to run this poll with you and see what you think. I have a couple of key questions here. So you should be seeing it on your screen. So please go ahead and answer. So the questions are, has COVID testing abroad, away from your home base, been a pain point for your operation? And it's, no, it hasn't really. Sort of. It's a mild inconvenience, but we're managing just fine. Or definitely, yes, it's created some challenges, or hard to tell since we aren't really traveling a lot internationally yet. So just taking a temperature so I can get the feedback to our trip support teams as they consider logistics, and definitely appreciate your feedback there. I'll give it a couple more seconds, say about 10, and truly appreciate your feedback there. And wrapping that up, I'll share these results with everyone so you can see how it bears out for the group. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to put this up for you. You should be seeing the results. So the sort of, everyone right in the middle. So it's probably a couple of trips that it's really impacting. And obviously a big group of you are still in the hard to tell category because you're just ramping up. Well, I want to thank you for that feedback. And let's move on to our main event and to Christine. So welcome in, Christine. Let's dive into those operational insights. Let's go ahead and start with the Caribbean.
So for the Caribbean, there are two countries to mention here. The first is Cayman Islands. So currently, vaccinated persons can travel to the country. Of course, they will need to complete an online registration form and complete a 5-day quarantine upon arrival. This is part of their phased approach as far as reopening. And according to the latest announcement, they will be able to move about freely without quarantine, those vaccinated persons, as of October 14th. And the second country here is Trinidad and Tobago. So effective July 17th, vaccinated persons can enter the country. They'll need to apply for that entry online and provide PCR testing prior to arrival. The one thing to note here is that unvaccinated persons are not permitted entry into the country.
Got it. All right, moving on to Central and South America.
So both of these regions have been pretty stable, so there are no items to mention here.
Okay, great. Now, I know Andrea and Jason are here to give us a deep dive into Italy and the UK. They're going to do that in a few minutes, but can you give us a snapshot into the rest of Europe, Middle East, and Africa?
So for the EU, we'll start there. That's seen the most changes in recent weeks. The first one is Ireland. As of July 19th, it does permit vaccinated persons coming from the US to arrive into the country quarantine-free. They will need to complete an online form. The one thing to note here is that persons that look to come in with proof of recovery or a PCR test will need to complete quarantine upon arrival. And that's 10 days until they test out after day 5. Then we have Germany. It added the US to the approved country list, and as such, you can come in for any purpose. You will need to show proof of vaccination for that entry. Then we have the Netherlands. As of June 24th, US persons can come into the country. The good thing is, of course, they won't need to take any PCR testing or any quarantine. They will need to complete, though, a health declaration form. Then we have Sweden. As of June 30th, US persons can come into the country quarantine-free, of course, for any purpose. Prior to arrival, they will need to submit a PCR test 48 hours prior to that arrival. Then we have Slovenia. Slovenia added the US to the approved green country list, and as such can enter for any purpose. They can do so by either showing proof of vaccination, a PCR test, or proof of recovery. Then we have Austria. Austria states that as of July 1st, persons coming from the US can enter the country as long as they've been in the US in the preceding 10 days. And you can come in showing vaccination or proof of a PCR test. And then last but not least, we have Estonia. Estonia permits US persons to come in for any purpose. Of course, you need to show proof of vaccination or a PCR test, and you need to complete an online health declaration form. Then for the Middle East, the country to mention here is Kuwait. They have announced that as of August 1st, vaccinated non-citizens will be able to enter the country, but they're going to have to meet certain requirements. So they're going to have to show that proof of vaccination, download the country's app as far as monitoring. They will need to have health insurance and complete quarantine upon arrival. And then for Africa, things have remained stable here, so there are no items to mention right now.
Got it. You did have a lot of updates in that section. So let's move on to the Asia Pacific region. What's the latest there?
So as with Europe, we have seen some changes in this part of the world. The first item to note is Thailand. As of July 1st, they permit vaccinated persons to enter the country, but specifically to Phuket only. This is part of what they're referring to as the sandbox program, and it's part of their reopening process. As such, of course, you'll need to show proof of vaccination, complete online forms, have pre-testing for COVID, PCR testing, and have health insurance prior to arrival into the country. Then we have the Philippines. The Philippines allows vaccinated persons coming from an approved green list to enter the country. Right now, the US is not on that list, but persons that are able to get in will have to show that proof of vaccination, and they will need to stay at a COVID-approved hotel for 7-day quarantine, at which point they will be completing PCR testing at that hotel. Then we have Georgia. Georgia permits US persons to come in for any purpose. Of course, quarantine free. They will need to show proof of vaccination or a PCR test. If they choose the PCR test format, they will be considered unvaccinated, and as such will need to complete another PCR test on day 3. And then last but not least is Sri Lanka. They are permitting vaccinated persons to enter the country. As such, you'll have to complete an online form. You will need to provide health insurance, and of course, complete an online health registration form. Upon entry, you will be doing COVID testing, and you will have to stay at what they call a level 1 hotel until those results are known. If they are negative, you are free to move about your way without any quarantine, but you have to consider that you need to take another PCR test 7 days after arrival.
Got it. And just a quick pause before I get onto world events, because I know we've gotten some feedback that we are going through a lot of detail, and that is true. But one thing we are adding, in addition to the recording link that you're going to get on the Thursday email, we are adding in an audio transcript. So you will get this information. You'll be able to access the printed format, all of this written out for you so that you can see it in print format. That'll be along with a recording. Hope that helps. And now, Christine, let's go back to our world events. What's the newest there?
So world events, of course, we are seeing things being penciled in, especially in the European region. And as such, of course, if you are looking to travel there, there's fashion weeks. I think Italy itself has a furniture show that is very high traffic. And the Olympics are happening right now, and Davos 2022 is on the docket. So if you are going to be going to any of these events, you need to get those requests in as soon as possible.
Excellent. Now let's wrap up, as always, with your top tips and key reminders.
So the first thing I wanted to mention here is, of course, plan ahead. I know it sounds simple, but as soon as you know that you may be going somewhere, you want to submit those requests. A lot of these destinations, especially in the EU, are first come, first serve. And as such, the earlier you get that request in, the earlier you may get the service that you're looking for. The second thing is to be flexible. Again, the EU is receiving very high traffic, and as such, those primary destinations are likely not to have an option for parking. The standard alternates that we've seen in the past may also not be available for parking, so you may have to reposition further out than you originally thought that you may have to. Then as far as those high demand services, of course, everybody is traveling to those same destinations. So be aware that a lot of these vendors on the ground are still trying to recover from COVID, get their personnel back on track. And as such, that response time may be slower than normal. So please be patient. The same applies for government entities as far as their response time to permits, slots, and PPRs, to name a few. But the last item I wanted to mention is access to venues. We're seeing a trend in the EU right now where countries are enacting regulation that in order to enter establishments, such as restaurants, you need to show proof of vaccination. So right now, countries such as Austria, Greece, and Cyprus have already put those laws in place. And France is working on it currently. So it remains that proof of vaccination is the easiest form of entry both into a country and to establishments within that country.
Got it. Well, it looks like, Christine, the 3 Ps of operations are really in effect still, which are parking, planning, and patience for all operations worldwide. Plan for all of the above. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Christine. I appreciate it. And we are going to move on to the North America update with Juan. So I'd like to bring Juan up on screen. Welcome.
Thank you,
And
Annabelle.
can you, of course, good to have you.
Thank you.
So let's go ahead and get started with the breaking news out of Canada.
Sure. So big announcement that beginning August 9th, fully vaccinated citizens, U.S. citizens and residents will be permitted to enter Canada on non-essential travel. Now, to be eligible to enter Canada, fully vaccinated U.S. citizens must have received the full series of a vaccine accepted by the government of Canada at least 14 days prior to entering the country. And your approved vaccines are your normal vaccines, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Moderna, etc. Now, travelers can receive their vaccine in any country, doesn't have to necessarily be the US, but must be able to provide evidence supporting their vaccination in English or French. And if it's not in English or French, it must be with a certified translation. Now, entry of unvaccinated children under the age of 12 who are US citizens are allowed to come into Canada as long as they are being accompanied by a fully vaccinated parent or legal guardian. This extends to residents as well. As far as crew, things will remain the same. Crew are exempt from quarantine since they are deemed essential workers. So there's no need for vaccines or tests for a stay up to 72 hours on crew. In addition, fully vaccinated travelers must also provide the COVID-19 related information through the ArriveCan app, including proof of vaccination prior to prior to departing for Canada. Now you have to also be asymptomatic upon arrival and have a paper or digital copy of the vaccination document in English or French, as I mentioned, ready to show the government official on request. As far as entry for other travelers, entry into Canada will be prohibited for US travelers who are not fully vaccinated and for all other foreign nationals. However, with this announcement dating August 9th, there is also a plan to accept fully vaccinated travelers from other countries starting September 7th. Now, this is not official yet, but it is a plan and it is in the works. We've also received a couple of questions regarding the funnel ports, the 4 funnel ports that have been issued since I believe it was a few months ago. Well, they're adding 5 additional ports to this funnel list. So in addition to the 4 current ones, you are going to have the ability to go into Edmonton, Winnipeg, Ottawa, Quebec, and Halifax. This particular announcement hasn't been officially set in stone, but that will be coming in the next several days.
Okay, so some definite good news and some loosening, much anticipated and needed into Canada. So as far as, and I apologize, Juan, if I missed this, but is there any travel restriction between the provinces once you're in country?
No, there's no travel restrictions as long as you abide by the local government guidelines of wearing masks and staying social distancing.
Okay, so good to know. All right, let's move on to the US. Any news there?
Sure. So with the announcement of Canada easing restrictions, it's a little bit of pressure on the US to ease those restrictions as well. But unfortunately, right now, the proclamations restricting air travel continue to be in full effect, and there's been no official date of the end of these proclamations. There's a lot of rumors and a lot of news articles stating that the ease into the US will happen soon, but as of now, there hasn't been any official end to the restrictions. President Biden did mention during his meeting with German Chancellor Merkel that the restriction for European travelers in the next several would be announced in the next several days, but that was back in July 5th with no decisions made since. In fact, there was an announcement from the Department of Homeland Security this morning via Twitter stating that the US is extending restrictions on non-essential travel by land and ferry with Canada and Mexico through August 21st. So even if we're thinking that it's going to ease here in the US, it will in the future, but as of now, things remain the same. But one update which we do have is that the NIEs, the National Interest Waivers, have been extended to be valid for 12 months from the date of approval. This announcement was made back on June 29th. So if you have received an NIE, a national interest exemption, it will be valid for 12 months as opposed to a one-time use as they were before.
Got it. Thank you, Juan. I appreciate that. And while we wrap up in North America, what about Mexico?
Sure. Mexico remains the same. They are open, and especially now with the high demand for tourism in the Americas, Mexico remains the same. We're seeing a lot of traffic through tourist spots, Cabo, Cancun, Vallarta, etc. Currently, there's no restrictions going into Mexico as long as you are asymptomatic and fill out your declaration upon arrival. Now, departing out of Mexico, we've been receiving feedback that finding a testing site may be a little troublesome, but do know that departing out of Mexico, you can get with your service provider or whoever is managing your operation into Mexico, and they would be able to help with the test needed to depart out of the country.
Got it. Yeah, back to that testing question again. So Juan, thank you so much for those updates. If you can, I know you're going to be with us throughout. I know you've gotten a couple of additional follow-up questions in the chat, so I'll let you get to those. And then, of course, I know we'll get some more at the end. I'm sure Canada is going to be a popular topic. So thanks, Juan. All right, and then I want to move to our guest from Europe. So we're going to start with Andrea, who has the dubious honor of being now, how many webinars in a row have we had you on? Just the Mediterranean is so incredibly. I think it's four, right? So welcome in, and this is obviously a pleasure to have you on. And most importantly, now the news for Italy is just getting even more urgent because it's such an in-demand location. The joke has been is that Italy is now the new Greece, because Greece, since it opened earlier, was just flooded with demand. Now it's all about Italy, Italy, Italy. So with that in mind, what are those top destinations for Italy right now?
Yes. So hello, everyone. Top destinations currently are Rome, Naples, Genoa, Florence, Catania, Palermo, Olbia, Venice. And we already have a high demand for Milan, both Linate and Malpensa in September for many important events taking place.
Excellent. So our trip support teams and your team on the ground in country have confirmed there can be some very slow response times at times from the airports in Italy. Can you provide some information or examples?
Well, we have the usual common difficulties in obtaining parking confirmation during summer due to high traffic. The difference this year is that airports have less capacity for multiple reasons attributable to aftermath of COVID issues. For example, some airports in south of Italy are now limiting ferry repositioning flights as they give priority to live flights.
Understood. With the heavy traffic that you're experiencing and the additional restrictions you're seeing, what are the recommended parking alternates for some of the most popular destinations?
It's a good question, because this year, more than in the past, it is paramount to choose with us the correct repositioning airport, trying to find the right compromise between operators' needs and parking availability. Milan, both Linate, Lima India Mike Lima, and Malpensa, Lima India Mike Charlie, are hassle-free airports, good airlines connection with intercontinental flights, and dedicated FBO. Rome, Lima India Romeo Alpha, Olbia, Lima India Echo Oscar, and Genoa, Lima India Mike Juliet for the center of Italy. And for Sicily, Trapani, Lima India Charlie Tango is a good option.
Thank you. And what about the experience on the ground? What's it like in country once travelers arrive?
At the moment, all the country is rated low risk, so no curfews, no need to wear masks outdoor, and all the restaurants, shops, and hotels are normally open. There might be changes in the next days, as some regions may introduce restrictions in attending events in presence to non-vaccinated people. So if you need reliable and updated information, get in touch with us, and we will be more than happy to share them with you.
Good advice, especially with the demand. And finally, I always like to ask, what is the key advice you'd like to leave our operators with if they're planning a trip into Italy right now?
We recommend to send all passengers documents in advance, copies of the digital passenger locator form, COVID certificates, that is negative tests, vaccination certificates or recovery certificates, general declaration with the passenger manifest, and copies of the passport. This is important for two reasons. It helps to guarantee the feasibility of the flight, and it will consistently speed up the immigration process. And finally, for the good success of the mission, we suggest to send precise details of all the services required, such as catering, specific needs, rental cars, ground transportation, hotel accommodation, whatever, to help arranging tailored services.
All right. As always, good advice, and maybe we can make it 5 webinars. You never know, Andrea, so stay tuned. We keep calling on your expertise. As always, appreciated. Now, I want to wrap up with our Universal Aviation offices in the United Kingdom. I want to welcome back also a return guest, Jason Hayward. I know you're probably back a lot sooner than you thought you would be, so welcome in. While there is no breaking news to report on the UK, at least not as opening, and especially not around that UK-US corridor that we hope opens soon, or of additional loosening of restrictions of note, expectations, are very high that good news may be arriving soon, especially as vaccinations continue to rise. Can you give us the recent update?
Thanks, Annabelle. Actually, I think it's my mum that's requesting my repeat visits. But the UK traffic light system continues to do its utmost to confuse us all. Indonesia, Cuba, and Sierra Leone were added to the red list this week, and Hong Kong was the only country of note added to the green list. But the important thing to note with the green list is they have a watch list attached to it, meaning that the UK government could pull that green list status at very, very short notice. Sometimes they will do it overnight. So just keep an eye on those lists. UK vaccinated travel for UK nationals has opened up at last, though. What that essentially means at present is that a UK national who has had his COVID jabs done here in the UK by our health service can travel to and from amber list countries, but following the green list. So we are hoping in the next couple of weeks, announcements from the government about them extending that for European nationals traveling from amber list countries using the EU digital passport. We had a industry brief from the Department for Transport. They are in talks with the US. The problem that they cite with that is the lack of a consistent digital passport for vaccines in the United States, but also our virus levels here in the UK. Even though we've got very, very high vaccination levels, we've also got a high level of the Delta variant, which is working its way through the millennials, who I think are the last group to left to be done.
All right, so some good news and some mixed news to report. Do you have any further insider info to share, especially on the potential changes that we could be expecting? I know you went over some. Any more of the crystal ball or tea leaves you would like to read for us?
Actually, the best advice I can give is stay in touch with your trip support people, because we are speaking to them a dozen times a day on 100 different scenarios. The rules go up and down faster than Jeff Bezos in a rocket, and this stuff is difficult. You've got to stay in touch to make sure that you've got the latest information before you travel. And I can't leave you without saying something about Brexit. And for charter operators, just be aware that permit processing times have been extended due to the volumes now that the UK CAA are having to process for European charter operators wishing to come here to the UK.
Right. And I did want to follow up because you mentioned something a few days ago when we spoke about today's session that there is no, speaking of crystal balls and tea leaves, there is no, the moment news comes out about a change, unfortunately, it usually is not immediately accompanied by the details dropping into your inbox.
That's right. So how it works here in the UK, and I'm pretty sure this happens around the world, is our Transport Minister stands up in the House of Commons and announces the next great evolution of our travel restrictions. And then when we speak to the Department of Transport, the personnel, they haven't even written the rules yet. And when I kind of complained about that process, they kind of laughed as if to say that would make sense. So there is a lag between government ministers making announcements and the small print that you rely on to make sure that you're doing the right thing before you enter the country hits the deck. So be patient, stay in touch with us. We work very hard at this stuff, but it is difficult, but we do get there in the end.
Excellent. All right, more of the sage advice from Jason in the UK. All right, well, again, you stay tuned because no doubt we're going to have you back as well. So thank you, Jason. And just a quick note, we're about to transition into your questions. A ton of you sent in questions in advance. Some of them I noticed now we definitely have covered at least a good portion of the topic in the body of our presentation, but we're going to try to go through and make sure we refine some of those points for you. And one other key thing, I did want to note that we cover a lot in these sessions, but one perennial resource you have is the Universal Weather and Aviation blog. The most up-to-date information on restrictions is posted there. Also our weekly calm. So again, this is a lot to maintain in your head. Don't expect you to. That is the resource to go to. So Laura, when you get a chance, if you haven't put up just the blog URL, that's a great place. If you don't have that bookmarked, follow it, subscribe to it. It provides you with the access, and it's also very searchable. So you can find the specifics on the locations you're going to as you're doing your own research. So just a piece of advice if you haven't already taken advantage of. All right, we're going to go on to those pre-submitted questions. Thank you to everyone that sent them in advance. It does help us be prepared. So a couple of notes. We are right at a little bit past the half-hour mark. We're going to stay on and answer these questions as well as try to get to some of the live ones. If you haven't sent in your questions, please go ahead and get those into the chat. And do not forget, I know your time is super valuable, and you're getting busier, which is great news because that means you're flying more. Do know that this full recording will be available via a link we'll send out in our weekly ops communication. So look for that in your email on Thursday. So our first question actually goes to Juan. This operator asks, is it possible to touch on any changes for US to Canada ops? I think we've got some insight there. We have a client where the husband is dual US Canadian citizen and the wife is just a US citizen.
So in those cases, because they are married, as of now, they are able to travel in Canada, obviously, if he is a Canadian citizen, and herself as a wife are able to travel to Canada. And again, beginning August 9th, as long as the US citizens are fully vaccinated, there are not going to be any restrictions going in. Non-essential travel would be lifted at that moment.
All right, thank you, Juan. And actually, this next question involves you too a bit. So are crew changes allowed in Gander? And then we're going to have a follow-up on Scotland, London, and Spain, and how open are they? So I'm going to bring on a few of you to help answer this question. I think that's Christine, and who else do we say? We're going to have Jason as well as a whole bunch of you.
So I'll start with the Gander portion. Yes, crew switch for Gander is acceptable as long as no passengers disembark the aircraft. If it's just a tech stop and there are no passengers disembarking or embarking, their crew changes are available.
Great, thanks. All right.
As far as Spain is concerned, crew changes are available. Of course, there's a lot of flights into and out of. The one thing to consider is that when you are traveling as a passenger on a commercial flight, you will need to adhere to those requirements as a passenger. So coming into Spain, you would meet the requirements coming in as passenger. And then if you're crewing back commercially into the US, you would meet those passenger requirements.
Thanks, Christine. And then what was our final on, Scotland?
Scotland. So very similar rules to here in England. Positioning flights with positioning crews, but as Christine just mentioned, very similar rules here in the UK. So the crew coming in to pick up the flight do need to follow the passenger rules, but they can release from quarantine to take up their duties.
Excellent. All right. So Christine, we're going to leave you on for this next question. We're going to look for clarity on testing for PCR, clarity on testing. Wow, I wrote this all wrong, so hold on. We're looking for clarity on PCR testing requirements. If travelers have a negative PCR test before departing for an international location and return within 72 hours in total, do they need to test again from the international departure location?
So if we're referring to the US, the important thing is that it's not 72 hours, it's 3 days. Test day is day 1. So as long as they travel outside of the US, they can return with that if it's valid within those 3 days. For the international locations, as long as it's valid within that time frame, each country is different. Some is 48, some is 72 hours prior to arrival. As long as it's valid, it'll be accepted.
Okay. Now, Christine, we're going to continue with you. This operator is asking, they're seeking any coming soon information available on South Korean vaccinated traveler requirements and quarantine waivers.
So coming into South Korea for a US national, there is an exemption, what they call a self-isolation exemption. You have to apply for this via the Korean embassy, and you're going to have to submit appropriate documentation. Right now, they're just permitting US persons coming in to see family or for business. So you're going to have to showcase that proof, business letter, whatever that may be. If that is approved, of course, you have to show that proof of vaccination. 14 days must have passed since the last dose of that vaccine. And of course, you will need to be tested upon arrival. And then you have to go into quarantine until the results on arrival are known. So usually that takes 8 to 12 hours for that COVID test to get those results.
Got it. All right, thank you, Christine. We're going to move to Andrea. Parking options in Italy for an entire week. This operator plans to drop in Genoa and pick up in Naples.
It really depends on the length of the stay and the type of aircraft. Generally speaking, for an ICAO Category C aircraft, up to 1 week, Genoa might work. Otherwise, Milan, Rome, or Olbia.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrea. We're going back to Christine. So EU digital COVID certificate for those having received vaccinations in the US. How to obtain? And I know you touched on this in your overview, but just to refine the point.
Yes, so U.S. nationals cannot get the EU digital COVID certificate at this time. It's not available to them. The only exemption to that is if the U.S. national is also an EU national and will then have to go through those consulates and or government sites to submit all the documentation needed in order to gain that approval.
Excellent. All right, we're going to stay with you. We have a scenario posed. Would a U.S. Part 91 aircraft carrying fully vaccinated crew and passenger be able to stop in the UK, pick up one passenger, and then continue to France?
As long as all the passengers on board are vaccinated, there are no issues with that. And that's specifically for France. If we get into other countries, each and every case is, of course, a different scenario.
Understood. So also for you, Christine, with regard to COVID entrance restrictions, is most of the EU and Mediterranean allowing air crew with proof of vaccination in with no restrictions? Is this also the same with a negative PCR test?
So as far as the EU is concerned, most of the EU, as far as I can see, are permitting crew in without the need to complete COVID vaccinations. They're exempt from those requirements. They just would have to fill out the appropriate entry documentation. Now, of course, we would recommend that the crew have those vaccine certificates. And the reason is because a lot of countries in the EU right now are working on enacting regulation, or they've already implemented it on gaining access to those establishments. So if you're in the country without your vaccine card for 10, 15 days, you're likely not going to be able to go out to restaurants unless they're outside. And it's up to the owner of that facility if they're going to let you in or not. So it's best to have that vaccination.
Got it. Thanks, Christine. So Juan, we're back to you. We've got a series, I think, here of Canada questions. So this operator states, now that Canada is opening up, is testing still required for entry into Canada if PACs are vaccinated? There's been seeing some conflicting info in what's been posted, and they understand that crew do not need to be tested. So if you can please advise on the specifics.
Sure. So we're talking about the August 9th implementation of the new requirements. And after that date, what's been the day one testing or the arrival test when a passenger arrives into Canada is actually moving to a randomized testing for fully vaccinated US or Canadian. So there is no technical requirement to have testing done before or upon arrival into Canada. And as far as crew is concerned, same exemptions. Crew does not need to provide either a vaccine record or testing.
Got it. And Juan, also, will a vaccination card also need to be presented to customs to enter Canada after August 9th?
Yes, absolutely. So you either have to have a digital copy of the vaccination record or the digital copy or a paper copy of it.
Got it. Thanks, Juan. And I know that we got another couple of questions, all specific to those airports of entry and what's going to be allowed. So if you had a chance, I apologize, I haven't been able to keep up on the chat. It's been busy.
worries.
If you've been able to drop that information in, I know we're getting more questions related to it, so that would be great. Thank you. All right, and I think we're going to wrap up with Christine on these pre-submitted questions. We're going all the way back to the Caribbean. Christine, what's the latest on the Dominican Republic?
For the Dominican Republic, they don't have any restrictions. Of course, entry is possible with the proof of vaccination or PCR test, and you have to complete an online entry form.
Got it. So an easy one. All right, so let's move then to our live questions. I know there's been activity. It's been fast and furious, but I know some of you are, thank you very much, answering questions in the chat live, which is even better as everyone gets to see them. Laura, do you have some questions that we can share out from the whole group?
Yes, thank you, Annabelle. The first question is for Jason. Jason, we've been asked about European RAM checks. Can you talk a little bit on this?
Yes, Laura. So all of Europe uses a very similar template for their REMP checks, including here in the UK. And you can download a copy of that from the EASA website. Typically, though, the things that they are looking for, aside from making sure the big bits are still attached on the outside, are expiry dates. So make sure your life belts, your life rafts, your extinguishers are all in date. If you need spectacles, as specified on your license, make sure you've got them with you. That actually grounded a flight with us temporarily. Thankfully, we have a 1-hour opticians around the corner, and we were able to fit him up with some new glasses before the passengers arrived. So make sure things are in date. As I said, you can get a copy of that EASA REMP check form off of their website.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jason. Christine and Andrea, next question is for you. What are the requirements and restrictions for Mexican passengers for entering Italy, Spain, and France?
I can answer for Italy. It depends on the 14 days travel history. If passengers have been in Mexico in the last 14 days, then they have to have a valid reason to enter Italy, such as business, health, or urgency. Unfortunately, the tourism option is not permitted yet.
As far as Spain and France are concerned, for both countries, the regulation states that as long as the passengers are vaccinated, they can enter the country for any purpose. But it's important to note that they may be able to enter both of these countries, but if they look to transit from there to Italy, when they fill out that online form and they put that 14-day history, they will be denied entry into Italy.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christine. Juan, I think this one is for you. If passengers are vaccinated, they do not need to quarantine upon entry into Canada. Is that correct?
That's correct. Starting August 9th, if they're fully vaccinated, now again, these are US citizens and US residents. If they are fully vaccinated, the quarantine restriction has been lifted after August 9th.
Okay, great. Thank you. Jason, what document suffices for proof of vaccination? Does the EU recognize CDC vaccination card?
Actually, I'd probably send it over to Andrea. I don't want to dodge that bullet. It's difficult enough for me to keep up with the requirements to get here into the UK.
So right now, the EU will accept the US CDC card for entry into all countries right now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Christine. The next question is there a stay limit of 72 hours for trips into Canada?
No, the stay limit of 72 hours, again, this is all after August 9th, will be lifted as well. Now, crew that have not been vaccinated, that fall under the exemption of the vaccination and or testing, do have that 72-hour limit. But fully vaccinated US citizens no longer need to only stay in Canada for 72 hours.
Great, thank you. And then are there any issues with unvaccinated crew going to Greece or Cyprus, staying for 10 days?
They can gain entry into the country unvaccinated because they are exempt from the COVID requirements. But because both of those countries have regulations enacted, if they want to go to any venue, I don't care if it's inside a restaurant or inside a business, they will be looking for that proof of vaccination. And if not, they're going to be basically stuck eating in their hotel room.
Okay, great. And Christine, while I have you there, can you give repeat some information on Israel?
Haven't mentioned Israel, but as far as Israel, they are still closed to U.S. nationals. So you can only get in if you have specific purpose, and you have to get that approval from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you. Next question is, any news on when IATA Travel Pass will be uploaded and passengers can start uploading vaccine cards and documents for flying?
As far as IATA, I haven't seen when that will be coming to fruition. The concern is that the EU, especially if we're looking for travel to the EU, you either have to show the CDC card or you have to show the EU COVID certificate right now that has a specific QR code. We would have to look at specific situations if they would accept the IATA platform.
Thank you, Christine. And I believe that is all the questions. And I think the rest of the questions were answered in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Laura and Christine and all of our panelists. So I did have our communications team remind me that as the breaking news continues to exist, we are still updating the blog as we go. So we do keep that as up to date as possible. Some details, especially with like this Canada breaking news, for example, will get updated and then updated again. So the best course of action is always check with your ISP, your trip support provider, for the best and most up-to-date details. And as Christine always emphasizes, it is specific to your particular situation for crew and passengers, everything from vaccination status to their travel history. So do keep that in mind when you're planning for all of these events. So remember the 3 Ps: parking, planning, patience, tons of patience as you go. And thank you all for joining us. I know we went just a bit over our time, but our goal is to continue keeping this, shrinking our time down a little bit more so that you can plan on being with us 30 to 40 minutes. A pleasure to have all of our panelists on. And thank you for all of your activity in the chat and staying engaged. It really makes for a great program. The recording will be out in tomorrow's the weekly communications, I can't say ops, the weekly ops communication, and as well useful links as always in that comm. But in addition, we're going to start including a transcript of this session so it's easy for you to reference. Look forward to hearing from you. Do drop me a note at operationalinsight@univway.com if you have any ideas for upcoming guests as well as topics to cover. A pleasure having you, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully in August. We're planning ahead for August the 18th. See you soon. Thanks so much.